Quick. All right. Baruch Hashem. Welcome everybody to Hilchot Teshuva. We are up to the third chapter, fifth halacha, and I'll be honest with you. It's a long piece, as we'll see in a moment, and it's a little bit confusing. So we'll need to explain. So first of all, we need we need to be a little caught up to where we're holding. So we've already learned that the Rambam said that the world is judged and people are judged and communities are judged based on their behavior, and we shouldn't think that it's like one mitzvah and there's one avera. Somebody's has one merit and one demerit, and that they're equalized somehow. Then they're Benoni. He says that there's such a thing as a Benoni, which is somebody who has an equal amount of each. That doesn't mean one for one. It's not a mathematical thing. It's not one mitzvah, the opposite of which it's like if it was a mitzvah, it would be like a +1, right? And an avera is a -1. That's not how it works. It's not that kind of graph we're going to be drawing. So that's something to keep in mind. Each mitzvah and each avera, depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending on all kinds of factors we can't possibly know, they're going to be measured differently. And when I mentioned again, and I emphasized this quite a few times last time, but it's worth remembering, it's not for us to judge. We have really no idea what's going on in the person's head. True story. With that said, we're about to see that even though the Rambam said that, he's now going to do some seemingly basic math for us to decide whether, how to help us figure out the math. Now, one easy way to explain this Rambam we're about to see is it's an example. So even though it's not a 1-for-1 ratio, even though it's not that mathematical, part of the cheshbon is something like a mathematical one, which is the one we're going to see in a moment. But another way to understand it is to understand his source. The Rambam is very, very rarely original, per se. He's like Rashi, he's much more of an editor than a writer. And so he's paraphrasing, he's quoting from all kinds of other sources. So this particular halacha we're going to get is based on two separate Talmudic passages. One is in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah 17a, where it talks about how Hashem forgives iniquity. It's a quote from Micha 7:18. Hashem forgives iniquity. So there's a teaching that this teaches that he forgives iniquity one by one. So each number matters. Okay. And then there's another teaching that even though the sin might be forgotten or forgiven, it's not erased, whatever that means, right? There's some vestige of the sin still affects the world, still affects the person who did this, right? And so the Gemara concludes there that if a person possesses mostly sins, this one is going to be counted amongst those. So it's included somehow. Okay, that's one passage. Then there's another passage in another Gemara in Yuma 86a. So Yuma is another tractate of the Talmud, actually the one right next to Rosh Hashanah, interestingly enough. Yuma having to do with mostly Yom Kippur. So it says there another teaching from a completely different school. And it says that if a person transgresses a sin once, if they sin one time, they're forgiven. You made a mistake once, you're forgiven. You went and got yourself a ham sandwich, no problem. Assuming, of course, you did it. Well, forget about assumptions. You did it, all right? You went and got yourself a ham sandwich. You weren't supposed to. You did. If you did it only once, you're forgiven. That's what it says, okay? If he does it a second time, also forgiven. And just like every good joke, right? The third time, that's where the punchline comes in, right? The third time you eat the sandwich, that's when you're going to get smacked with some sort of punishment. So that person's then not forgiven. Right? That's so we're going to now take those two. Well, that's one way to understand it. Like I said, those two separate passages from the Talmud are now going to be squished together by the Rambam into this halacha that I said that I introduced earlier is very hard to understand otherwise, and we're going to have to work through it, and that's okay. We've got time. I'm not worried. You're not worried. I'm not worried. We're good. All right. So it says here. So let me share the source so you don't have to. So you can believe me that I'm not making this up. Mishnah Torah, chapter 3. Chapter 3, halacha 5. Why is this closing? There we go. All right, that's one way to do it. Just turn off the whole thing. All right, so it says here, B'sha'a shoklin avonot adam im zchuyotav. At the time when a person's merits are measured against the person's demerits, right? Ein mechashvim alav avon shechata bo tchila v'lo sheni ela mishlishi ve'elech. Just like we said from the Gemara, when a person's sins are measured against that same person's good deeds, one thing that's not factored in is the first 2 times that the person sinned, whatever that sin is. Let's say the easy example, the metaphor that everybody likes to use, even for sexual immorality, is eating treif. Okay, so let's just use that as the metaphor. We'll go with that. Right? Somebody ate a hamburger, a cheeseburger. They weren't supposed to do it. They did it. They did it once, no sin, no punishment. They did it a second time, no punishment. They did it a third time. Now that sin is going to be weighed against that person's merits. Okay. And any subsequent time as well. Obviously, it doesn't cancel back. It doesn't it doesn't recall back to number 1 after the third time. So it's if the 4th time, 5th time, 6th time, 7th time. The third time is the first time, right? And from then on, ve'elech, right? Im nimtzu avonotav mishlosh ve'elech merubim al zchiotav. If now those sins have that have been committed 3 times, that third time outweighs the person's merits, otam shtei avonot mitztarfim, then the sins that were committed twice or less, right, are going to combine with those. V'danin oto al hakol, and they are included with the rest. Again, a person sins once, no punishment. Twice, no punishment. Third time, now there's going to be a punishment. But wait for the punishment. We're not even talking about that. Now we're going to judge the person. The person is judged at the end of his life, her life, also at every Rosh Hashanah, right? So now let's get back to Rosh Hashanah. Right now it's Rosh Hashanah. Hashem is judging the person, takes out the person's file. It's all metaphoric, obviously, right? Takes out the person's file, and we see that, indeed, the person has a lot of mitzvot. Gave a lot of tzedakah, went to shul, ate kosher, gave, cared and loved and everything else, all the good things, all the good mitzvot, tefillin, mezuzah. All right, easy, right? Some of these mitzvot are much, much easier than you think they are. Right? You don't have to even kiss the mezuzah to fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah. You just have to put one up. And then every time you walk through the door and you see the mezuzah and you have it in mind, it's a mitzvah. So it's a pretty easy mitzvah to do. All right. So, okay. And then all of those mitzvot are all gathered up on one side of the scale. And on the other side of the scale, we're going to put the person's sins. Now, this person's pretty good, didn't sin too much, had a couple of, maybe 5 cheeseburgers this year. Okay. Now, shouldn't have done it. The person knew it. All right. So now, what averot are going to be put on the other scale? And we said the first 2 times don't count, right? The person's not punished. It's only from the third time and on. So if he had, or she had 5, so we put 3 cheeseburgers on the other scale, right? So balanced against the mezuzahs and everything else. Now, if those cheeseburgers, right, were a great big sin for that person, meaning there were other options, they didn't even want it too bad, they only ate it to yell at Hashem. And there's a story. Who told this story? It was a few years ago, I think. there's a video. I think a lot of people saw. It was from a doctor in Sharitz, not Sharitz, no, Maimonides Hospital in New York, I think it was. Oh, no. Take that back. Cedar Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. See, I can remember some things. All right, so Cedar Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. A doctor was speaking how he would like in Elul. There's a custom to blow shofar for patients. So he would go and he would blow shofar for patients if they wanted it. Obviously, not every patient could handle it. It's very loud. I don't want to disturb, it's patients, it's hospital, and they're supposed to be resting. There's a reason for the beds, And so the person was blowing shofar, and then at one point, he blew shofar for somebody, and a few days later, he got a letter from somebody else, right? Somebody he'd never met before, and it was a religious lady who was in the cafeteria of the hospital, and she heard the shofar. And she writes, I don't know, I don't remember all the details. If I flub anything up right now, I apologize. You'll just have to take it for what it's worth. She writes like this. She writes that she was visiting her mother. Mother was very sick, and she was very upset with Hashem because she'd been praying, and she'd been religious and everything else, and her mother was just not recovering and was in a lot of pain. So she was very, very upset with Hashem. She was so upset with Hashem that she went to the cafeteria on purpose to buy non-kosher food, to buy, let's say, a cheeseburger. All right. So she went and bought a cheeseburger. She sat down and she's about to take a bite. And she said, Hashem, if you're really up there, show me a sign, and then I won't eat this cheeseburger. And just as she was supposed to take a bite into this cheeseburger, she heard the shofar. And so she wrote this letter to this doctor who blew shofar, and to see, the shofar is supposed to wake us up, as the Rambam said in our class last week. Right? So that's what this is, right? But that sin for her, eating a cheeseburger for her, is much different. Is a much different sin than, say, a girl who'd never learned about kosher. She's Jewish and she might have heard a thing or two, maybe her friends are kosher, maybe whatever. It's not an important thing in her life. She never actually experienced it. And so she usually eats cheeseburgers, right? That's just what she eats. Right? It's a pretty bad diet, but aside from all that, right? It's a normal food for her. So a cheeseburger for that girl versus a cheeseburger for somebody who's lahachist to try to fight against Hashem, is biting into a cheeseburger, are two very different sins, and Hashem knows that. That's part of the cheshbon, right? And I want to keep hammering on that because it's very important. Somebody wrote me recently about they're concerned about the sin. They're Baalei Teshuva now. It's a Baal Teshuva who's getting religious, and he's very upset about the things he'd done in the past, right? Because he didn't know any better, so he did this and he did that, and whatever. And he's read literature, Torah literature, that seems to imply that there's no going back. We're actually going to have the next halacha. You'll see that there's some things that are very hard to do teshuva for, or very well near impossible to do teshuva for. And you can probably imagine a few of these things, right? You can imagine somebody who, I don't know, as a mass murderer, God forbid, a school shooter, God forbid, right? We shouldn't know such things, right? So such a person can do teshuva if they find God, they feel sorry for what they did. They can start the teshuva process, but you can imagine it's going to be a difficult road. It's going to be almost impossible to do a full teshuva. Teshuva comes in parts also. It's not like it's not an all or nothing. That's also an important thing. That's one of the things I told this person. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to feel so, and very important, you don't have to feel so bad for the things you did when you didn't know any better, right? Like this girl who's eating cheeseburgers usually doesn't know that it's not kosher, doesn't really know that kosher is an important thing, or whatever aspect of the I don't know, wherever I don't know fits in, right? Whatever makes it bishogeg is different than bemezid, and it's certainly different than ones. So there are different levels of sin, and there's other levels besides those. And of course, for those of you who are new to Hebrew, again, bishogeg means by accident. Bemezid means on purpose, and be'ones means completely out of your control. Kind of like you were yawning and somebody threw a cheeseburger into your mouth, right? Okay, so, okay, that's okay. It's a weird situation. I hope that never happens, but I don't know what somebody's doing that. Anyway, we're not going to get into the background of that story, but that kind of thing can happen. There's sometimes an one situation, which is a total accident beyond your control. And also, as I was saying, there are other gradations of those three. Right? It's not all or nothing almost ever. So that's important to remember. Okay, so back to our text. Where are we anyway? We've been talking so long we forgot we were learning something. So what he says is that if the merits are equal or greater than the amount of demerits that were committed, and if they were committed more than 3 times, Hashem forgives all of those other sins one by one after the other, like bam, 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 right? Because the mitzvot outweigh the sins that much. Each one of those sins becomes the first, right? And then eventually it comes down to 0, perhaps, and then the person is completely forgiven. And that's how the forgiveness happens on Rosh Hashanah. Lefi shehashlishi nechshav rishon shekvar nimchalu hashnayim. And because of that third one, right? That third sin is considered like the first sin, right? Instead of the previous 2, as we've been saying before. V'chein harivi harehu rishon mikvar nimchal hashlishi. Once that third one is forgiven, now the fourth one becomes the first one, right? V'chein ad sofan, until the end, when all of them are one by one eradicated, totally forgiven, blown up. So those sins never happen. Okay. Okay, we'll start with that. And then he gives, and then just in case you're confused about whether this is true for a country or a person or a society or whatever, but what are we talking about? We're talking about with regard to an individual. Shanamar, as it says in Eov, the book of Job 33:29, Hein kol ela yifal kel pamim shalosh im gaver. So, which translates as Eov is not easy to translate, but basically these things Hashem will do twice or 3 times with a person, right? Yifal kel pamim shalosh, that's twice or 3 times with the person. So in other words, that indicates that a person is somehow judged by numbers, and this is actually very important because there is discussion about whether Rambam here is talking about sins being punished or whatever on Rosh Hashanah or at the end of a person's life, because at both of those times there's a judgment. So which judgment is Rambam specifically speaking about here? So there are opinions, including the Kesef Mishnah, who writes that Rambam is for sure talking about an individual here. He can't be talking about a society, because what are we talking about? There can't be that a society is going to be judged in this way, as we're about to see. No, sorry, take that back. What I'm saying is this, to clarify my thoughts here. All right, so the Rambam is either talking about after Rosh Hashanah or he's talking about after a person's life. There is no after a person's life if we're talking about a society. So a society doesn't die, right? So it says the Kesef Mishnah, this must be talking about Rosh Hashanah. That's first of all. And there are opinions. There are the Lechem Mishnah explains there is a way to read this as talking about the end of life. Also, we're not going to get into that now. But that's let's just take this. Let's go with the Kesef Mishnah here and assume that we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, because that's why we're learning this right now, amongst other things. All right, Aval Tzibur. But a community, tolim lahem avon rishon sheni ushlishi. So for a community, for a congregation, for a society, the first, second, and third sin are all held in abeyance. So the community is not punished for the first three sins. So forget about that punchline joke earlier about like for an individual. The individual is forgiven the first time and the second time and is punished the third time. A community is forgiven the first time and second time and third time. It's only on the fourth time when the community can start getting punished. Now, it's hard to even imagine what we're talking about here. We're talking about an entire community sinning together, okay? Knowingly, I'm assuming, right? So it's a hard thing to imagine. We should never know of such things, but there have been times in Jewish history when there's been such machloket, such arguments. They've kicked shochtim out of communities, rabbis out of communities, certain groups, the Hasidim versus the Misnagdim versus the Hasidim, or all kinds of other very, very aggressive battles, sometimes physically, between different groups of Hasidim, etc. Not going to get into all that. That's part of Jewish history, unfortunately. So in those situations, it could be that entire societies were punished. That could be an argument. I don't want to dwell on this too much. It's not a comfortable topic, but since we mentioned it also in last class, in another context, I think we did, or at least we mentioned it last week in one of the classes. I don't know, but we definitely mentioned the fact that there are people who are bothered by the fact that there was a Holocaust. Okay, assuming these people don't know that there are other tragedies in Jewish history where greater numbers of people, at least percentage-wise, were affected. We're going to forget that for a moment. The Holocaust was for sure, no question about it, a terrible event. I don't think anybody needed my my authoritative stamp of approval on that. It's for sure a terrible event, and certainly people died who were innocent and were not really held to blame. I think it was a Parsha class where we mentioned this last time. But there are authorities who have said that at least one, not the only, but a reason for the Holocaust could have been the fact that there was so little peace in Europe at the time amongst Jewish communities, in Jewish communities. There was so much infighting, so much machloket, just like when the Second Temple was destroyed. There's all kinds of infighting, and everybody's calling each other a heretic and not publishing each other's works and not learning each other's Torah, and sometimes physical brawls and stuff broke out in shuls. Yeah, can you imagine? So that sort of thing used to happen, and people got really hurt. And so Hashem might have said after one time, after two times, after three times, it is possible, if we're going according to the Rambam, that Hashem said after a while, this tzibur needs something, it needs a wake-up call. So again, I'm not at all implying that everybody deserved it. Not everybody was involved. Some people were trying very hard to make peace, right? The Chafetz Chaim wrote an entire book about Lashon Hara, all because of these kinds of events. So that's an important thing. But how do we know that a community is not punished after the first three sins, is only punished after the fourth time? Because of a pasuk in Amos. In Amos, famous Amos, chapter 2, verse 6, Shnei it says, Al shlosha pisha Yisrael, vel arba lo ashivenu. So this is specifically in reference to the Jewish people in the desert. This is why there's the famous upside down nuns in the Parsha in Baalotcha and in Bamidbar, as we spoke about Parsha class then. But they complained three times, and they complained a fourth time, and Hashem put the upside down nuns in between so that we wouldn't have three in a row. We wouldn't have more than three bad things in a row. So he broke it up a bit so that we wouldn't have this issue of punishment. So the verse says in Amos, translation is, for three sins of the Jewish people, I will not punish them, but for the fourth, I'm not going to hold back. Right? This is Hashem speaking through Amos. And when we add this up, we're trying to calculate when a tzibur should be punished. Again, this is all theoretical. We're not counting this. Hashem counts this. Hashem knows, not us, not me. Okay. So, but when we do this cheshbon, when we do this math, we'll see that the people are punished from the fourth time and on. Merevi ve'elech. Okay. Now, we've said before, there's a group of people, and I've suggested that this is most of us. Some of you might be tzaddikim, but I think the majority of us are Beinoni. A Beinoni is somebody whose merits and demerits are pretty well balanced. And actually, most of the Teshuva process, as the Rambam tells us in the last class, most of the Teshuva process between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is designed for the Beinoni, right? It's the tzaddikim don't need really the whole fasting and everything else and Yom Kippur and everything. They don't need it because they're already tzaddikim, they're already righteous. And the Rishayim, it's not going to do them any good. Their demerits outweigh their sins. Sorry, the demerits outweigh their merits, so they're as they say in Yiddish, verfallen, otherwise known as they got no chance. They're supposed to be instantly blotted out, and we talked about last time how that's an interesting thing because we know plenty of very, very not righteous people aren't blotted out immediately. There's no miyad in our sense of the word. So we said maybe it means something else. Maybe it means in terms of their judgment. When they are judged, they're instantly taken care of at the end of their life, for instance. Maybe. All right. It's food for thought. The Rambam doesn't really go into much detail there. All right. So back to Beinanim, these in-between people that again I suggest is most of us. Beinanim im haya bichlal mechza vonot shelahem shelo hiniach tefillin me olam dinin oto kfi cheto v'yesh lo chelik leolam haba. Woo! There's such a thing as a Beinani whose sins and mitzvot are about equal. Okay, whose sins and the merits, mitzvot and sins, right? So if amongst those sins is the neglect, for instance, of tefillin, so the example the Rambam gives, to the point that this person has never worn tefillin in his life, knowingly, right? We're not talking about they're in Soviet Russia or something like that, where they weren't able to get tefillin, or that they bought a pair of tefillin thinking that they were good tefillin, and it turns out after 120 years that tefillin were checked and they weren't kosher, or something like that. That kind of thing happens. I think I might have said this story before, but I'm very inspired by a story I heard when I was younger about a chassid, a particular old chassid, who found out when he was 83, when he was 83 years old, right? He decided to get his tefillin checked for the first time in 70 years. First time in 70 years, he's been putting on tefillin for 70 years. He had his tefillin checked. And he went to the sofer, he opened it up, and it turned out the tefillin were empty. There were no scrolls inside at all. It was just an empty box, which is not tefillin. Tefillin need to have the Shema inside and everything else. And so the person was asked, like, how do you feel? It's 70 years, 6 days a week for 70 years. You've been putting out tefillin, saying the brachot and everything, and all of those brachot were in vain. Every time you said you thought you were putting on tefillin, and all the effort you put into it, and all of it's gone. How do you feel? He looked at the interviewer and he said, "You know what? Baruch Hashem, I'm 83 years old and I'm still alive, and I could put on tefillin once. I might not I don't know how much longer I have, but I can put on tefillin. Now I know I can put on tefillin once." Tefillin is a huge mitzvah. Any mitzvah is a huge mitzvah. If you know you did it once, it's already a good thing. You know, you could have been doing it your whole life, and you could have been doing it wrong. You know, I recently, I hope I don't think I don't think this should embarrass anybody, but recently I saw somebody lighting Shabbat candles, and it wasn't completely 100% III. It wasn't so perfect. So so I mentioned a few things after Shabbat, and that the candles need to last a certain amount of time, have to be certain kinds of candles. It's not just whatever. It has to be lit. You have to light them where you're going to use the light, in other words, where you're going to eat. It can't be just lit anywhere. I said a few of these halachot, and this person a few weeks later came to me and said, Rabbi, for the first time in my life, I lit Shabbat candles right. Thank you so much. Right? We want to do things right. So why not? Like, learn how to do it right. Do it right, and you'll feel much better. That's a mitzvah. So back to this. We're saying this person, for whatever reason, is a Beinoni. This person's mitzvot and sins are about equal, right? Sorry, not about equal. Precisely equal. All right. If it's a mathematical thing, right? But this person, for whatever reason, this man has never worn tefillin, not once in his life, right? So Rambam says the person is judged according to the person's sins, right? Of course, but yesh lo chelik olam haba. The person still goes to Shemayim, still has a place in heaven. Why? He never put on tefillin. He ignored an entire mitzvah. Isn't that a problem? So, by the way, not everybody agrees with this Rambam. There's a very, very long piece in the Orach Chaim. If you want to look it up, it's in Devarim 8:1. It's available on Sefaria. So it's Orach Chaim talks there about. It says the pasuk says that Kol HaMitzvah, Hashem commanded us to do all the mitzvah, right? And everybody learns that all the mitzvah means the Torah. So why is it called mitzvah, not mitzvot? Because all mitzvot are connected. You can't have one and not have the other, right? You have to, if all of your body parts, your 365 limbs, they're all doing fine, but you're missing a heart. Are the other parts of the body going to be, oh, that's okay, it's just a heart? No big deal, just missing a heart. Or God forbid, somebody loses another body part, loses an arm in an accident. God forbid, shouldn't know of such things, right? You think the rest of the body doesn't care? Oh, it's just an arm. I don't really need it. I'm perfectly fine without it. No, the entire body is affected. So that all mitzvot affect each other. So you do mezuzah perfectly. You do Shabbat candles perfectly. You make kiddush perfectly. You give tzedakah perfectly, but you don't wear tefillin ever. You're missing something. It's a problem. So it could be there are commentaries who explain the Rambam here could be saying you get there is a chelik olam haba. In other words, there is a great reward for this person. The person had an equal amount of mitzvot and averot, etc. But it's not the greatest piece of property, right? There's different parts of real estate in every town, right? There's there's beautiful San Carlos, or you could be stuck with some other place I'm not going to name, right? So the same thing in olam haba. There's different parts, whatever. They're obviously not physical. This is just an easy metaphor for us to grasp the idea. But there are different rewards. The person gets a reward for the good things that the person's done. Similarly, kol harishayim she'avonotehem merubim dinin otam kfi chataehem yesh lachem helek l'olam haba. Same thing with all sinners, all people who deserve death, whose sins outweigh their mitzvot, whatever that means. They're that bad. They're going to get punished. Don't worry. But they're still going to get a chelik l'olam haba. This is interesting. Why? Shekol Yisrael, and he's basically quoting the thing that we read between every chapter of Pirkei Avot. Kol Yisrael yesh lachem chelik l'olam haba. Every person, every Yisrael has a piece of olam haba. Af al pi shecheto, even if they sin, Shenamar, as it says in the book of Yeshayahu, chapter 60. Yeah, that took a long time to say. Chapter 60, verse 21. V'amech kulam tzadikim, your nation, they're all righteous. Olam yushu aretz, and all of them will inherit the land. Obviously, you're not going to inherit the land after you die, because that's not going to do you much good. You can't really work land when you're not doing anything. Eretz zu mashal kolomar eretz achayim. So says the Rambam, the eretz here is not talking about land. It's talking metaphorically about the land of life. It's a metaphor for land after life, right? Shehu ha'olam haba, and that's the world to come. V'chein chasidei umat ha'olam yesh lahem chelik l'olam haba. And here he says a very controversial line that the same is true about the righteous of the Gentile world, that they also get a piece of olam haba. Now, when I say it's controversial, I should point out that there are differences of opinion in the medieval Jewish commentaries about how much and what exactly Gentile souls are worth. I think the majority of opinion, it's safe to say nowadays, all agree that Gentiles who are keeping the 7 Noahite laws all deserve and earn olam haba. That wasn't always the philosophy, though. Just wanted to point that out. The Rambam, by the way, clearly here says that they indeed do get olam haba. Okay, so before we get much further, there's one question I'd like to pose. It said this idea of your whole nation is righteous. Rambam has been talking about previous to this all of the reasons a person should the person sins, that they don't get olam haba, or they get punished, they get killed. How is it possible that these people are also going to get olam haba? So to answer that question, we have to look very carefully at this verse. And we're going to look at the commentary of Rav Shamshon or Fuller Hirsch in the beginning of his commentary on Pirkei Avot, where he talks about this phrase that Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik le'olam haba. All Yisrael have a chelik le'olam haba. It says Kol Yisrael, any individual, and this is a translation into English from German. I apologize, I don't know the German. Any individual who remains worthy of the name of Yisrael and who has not utterly divorced himself from Israel's lofty spiritual and ethical destiny and task has a portion in both of these, in the future of the world to come, as well as in that of the world here below. In other words, he's pointing out, it's not Kol Yehudim, it's not Kol Bnei Yaakov, it's Kol Yisrael. Everybody who acts like a Yisrael deserves olam haba. It's a very, very misunderstood phrase, because everybody's like, it doesn't matter what I do now, right? I'm going to get olam haba anyway. Cheeseburgers aplenty, right? So that's not the philosophy, right? That's not correct, right? Everybody deserves reward and punishment for their actions, but olam haba is reserved for Yisrael, people who are living up to that standard of Yisrael. And of course, as we said before, as the Rambam quotes, the righteous of the Gentiles as well get olam haba. His portion may vary depending on his degree and loyalty to Israel's task and destiny, but as long as he will remain Yisrael, he will never lose it entirely. Whatever good we achieve in loyal obedience to God here below becomes a spiritual accomplishment which will accompany us into the into the world to come and into the presence of our Father in heaven. At the time it serves. So basically, we will always have our portion of olam haba. That doesn't leave us, as long as we're up, depending on the degree to which we're living up to the standard of Yisrael. Now, before you say, wait a minute, if it has to be Yisrael, how can non-Yisrael, how can the Gentiles get this reward also? Good question. And the answer is, a good Gentile is somebody who's also living up to that standard. They're not Yisrael, but they're living up to the standard of Yisrael, right? They're righteous. They're giving tzedakah. They're caring about each other. They're not eating the limb of a living animal. They're not stealing, right? They're having justice. All of the usual things that we would expect from a good Jew is the same standard that we have for a good Gentile. We have more mitzvot, it's true, and maybe our reward is somewhat different. I don't know the degrees, and it really doesn't matter to me. Honestly, I don't know why it matters to so many people. When at 120 years, when I get my olam haba, I don't I don't really think too much about it. Like, what step am I going to be on? How close am I going to be to the Shekhinah? Or I don't really think about these things. And in comparison to somebody else, what do I care what the other person has? Right? That's not my place in life. Okay. Now, we're going to get now into a very, very famous or infamous part of the Mishnah Torah that deals with groups of people who don't get olam haba. Didn't we say everybody gets it? So that's why we have to read the Rav Hirsch. No, not everybody gets it. Not people who are not living up to the standard of Yisrael. So let's get right into chapter 3, halacha 6. Ve'elu hein she'en lahem chelik le'olam haba. These are the people who do not get a portion in the world to come. And he starts with, yeah. So before we get into the actual list, let's first talk about what does happen to them. So if they don't get olam haba, if they have a soul, what is olam haba? Well, that's a big discussion. We can have like a whole class. I think we have in the past a whole class on what olam haba is. But let's say, for argument's sake, the olam haba, after 120 years, olam haba is a sense of peace and joy and happiness and this confidence in Hashem, like total knowledge of Hashem. Like, there's no doubts, right? So the metaphor that I've been taught in the past is, in those times when you're in class, back when you're in school, and you were in a class and you had this idea, like the light bulb went on in your head, right? Oh, you finally figured something out. That feeling, as good as it is, it lasts something like a split second, right? So imagine that good feeling lasting forever, right? Not a split second, not even a second, not a minute, not an hour, forever. That joy of like finally figuring everything out, right? That's olam haba. At least olam haba for some people. For people who care about that sort of thing, right? So that's olam haba, right? So that's what's supposed to happen to our souls. Our body is, of course, decomposing in the ground. Meanwhile, that's for our souls. All right. So what happens to those people who don't get olam haba? Ele nichratim v'ovdim v'nidonin al godel risham v'chatatam le'olam u'olmei olamim. Their souls are cut off, and they are judged for their behavior, for their bad behavior, forever. Le'olmei olamim, olam u'olmei, forever and ever and ever. That's the Rambam's way of saying forever and ever and ever. Right? It's constant, a constant bombardment of punishment for these people who do not get olam haba. Now, who are these people who don't get olam haba? I'm glad you asked. By the way, we'll, God willing, probably won't happen this year, but in future years, if this continues and we're still learning Mishnah Torah, as I hope we are, eventually we'll get to chapter 8, halacha aleph of Mishnah Torah, where he also talks in some great detail about exactly what happens with the punishment of what he's discussing here, which is actually his definition of karet, which is the sin mentioned in the Torah of being cut off. That's what karet means. Is instead of going up there where you're going, or there's no up. I'm just metaphor. All right. So instead of being in this aura of knowledge of God and understanding and clarity and peace, you get none of that, and you're cut off from that. The door is locked. Right. So that's bad enough. All right. So who are these people who don't get that? The first group is called minim. Okay. And although we're going to go into more detail in halacha 7 exactly what the minim are. We're basically saying people who contradict Torah in such a way as to basically start their own religion, right? So that would be a min, okay? And it's worth mentioning. We'll probably talk about this when we get to the next halacha, as I said, but it's worth mentioning now that the early Christians, not for the most part, not most modern day Christians, but the early Christians were often called minim in Talmudic and halachic literature. Okay, remember, early Christianity is different than what Christianity is today. They had a lot more iconography. They had basically they had religious symbols that they prayed to. There was a lot of them knowingly. Some of them were Jewish, and then they left Judaism to follow this religion that was very, very heavily influenced by Roman mythology, right? Apollo and that sort of thing. And they went after that, and that's one of the reasons that the rabbis were so against early Christianity, amongst other reasons. The Epicurus. Epicurus is, usually we use that phrase nowadays for somebody who is an atheist, right? Somebody who doesn't believe in God. That's not how that's not the only definition, but it says here, hakofrim batorah, people who deny the Torah. And denying the Torah, as we'll see in halacha 8, we're going to get to a lot of these are going to be detailed in the coming halachot, by the way, in case I didn't mention that before. But these are two different things, as we'll see. And Epicurus, let's say, is specifically, let's say it's somebody who's, let's say, an atheist, right, for lack of a better word, and the somebody who denies the Torah isn't necessarily an atheist. Like, they believe in God. There's a lot of people who, oh, I believe in God, I just don't believe in organized religion, right? Like, who are these individual human beings, fallible rabbis and priests and everything else? They could have been mistakes, and they're mostly men, and who, what do they know about my life? So I'm just going to ignore them, right? So that could be a different category called kofrim b'Torah, people who don't believe in the Torah. In other words, don't believe that the Torah was transmitted orally and in written form into the way that we have it today, right? So that's an important distinction. The next category that of people who do not get olam haba, and this one makes a lot of sense. This is a great mida keneged mida example. Hakofrim b'tchiat hametim b'viat hagoel. People who don't believe that their body is going to be, or that bodies are going to be, not necessarily theirs might not, but anyway, that they don't believe that that the bodies will come back to life, and they don't believe in the coming of Mashiach. Those are two of the 13 principles of faith that the Rambam, same author here as the Mishnah Torah, right? So those are some of the principles of faith that he brought down. Now, keep in mind, this is worth mentioning, that those things that we call the 13 principles of faith, aside from the fact that not everybody agrees with them, which is a very controversial thing to say nowadays for some reason, although it shouldn't be. It's a historical fact. There's plenty of commentary on his commentary on the Mishnah where this is from, where it's clear that not everybody agrees that those are the 13 principles. But aside from that, it's also worth mentioning, why are they the 13 principles of faith? They are the Rambam's commentary, and hopefully in this year, or in coming years, we'll learn more about it. But the 13 principles of faith were the Rambam's explanation on the Mishnah in Sanhedrin that said that some people don't get olam haba. It's a direct correlation to this exact Mishnah, to this halacha right here. Okay, so minim apikorim kofim b'Torah kofim b'tchiat hametim v'et hagoel. Mordim, people who are people who rebel. Right, so that, like that example I gave earlier of the lady who was about to bite into a cheeseburger on purpose just to rebel against Hashem. They believe in God, they believe in the Torah, and they want to fight against it. Now, you might say, hey, that's crazy. Like, why would somebody do that if they know that there's a God and God knows what you're doing and you're going to get punished, et cetera, et cetera. So some people just are very upset with God for a variety of reasons, and it's difficult for us to judge these people, which is why we shouldn't. But there are injustices in the world, and people have been known to blame God. So I don't care if I eat a cheeseburger if he doesn't care about this injustice. If he's going to let this person not go to jail for his terrible sin, or this person's going to get elected and we know this person's a bad person, or whatever the person's gripe, could be a perfectly legitimate gripe. Something personal happened to them. They lost a family member, God forbid, or anything like that. So they are mordin, they are rebelling against Hashem for a variety of reasons. Umechatei harabim. Next category is somebody who causes a lot of people to sin. And we talked about this in quite a bit of detail 2 years ago when we learned Pele Yoetz. We talked about how it's very, very difficult to do Teshuva if you've caused many people to sin, right? If you were in our earlier example today of communities that fell apart, if you were the ringleader who pushed the shochet out of town, you caused a lot of people to sin. You made up a story or whatever, or you spread a story, whatever it was. It's a big problem. Uhapurshim midarche tzibur. Now this is one that is going to get more complicated it's already getting complicated with the post-COVID situation. And that's people who separate from the ways of the community, right? There's a community, and the communities say in mourning, let's say it's Tisha B'Av, and this person, for whatever reason, didn't go to shul. I'll mourn on my own. Let them say their own, let them say their keynote on their own. I don't care about what movies they're showing. I don't care, what the rabbi has to say. I'm going to just sit at home and do my own Tisha B'Av. So it's one thing, under certain circumstances, obviously, when there's a pandemic, it's perfectly acceptable, obviously, right? You shouldn't be in groups of people then. But now that it's calmed down, it's very important to join the community for as much as possible. Through their joy, through their sorrow, some individual in the community is hurting, the community can call, text, it makes the person feel better. True story. All right, so it's an important thing. So that's another thing. If a person's not doing that, a person's not, doesn't feel like a part of the community that they should be a part of, it's a problem. And we're not talking about antisocial behavior. It's not because the person is naturally an introvert, not an extrovert or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. Obviously, if there's something wrong with the community, or if it's hard for you to be outgoing, or if you're going through some sort of private pain or something and you don't feel like being in a crowd, okay, there are reasons not to join a community in individual situations. But if that's become your lifestyle, where you don't join the community when they have a simcha, you on purpose will not join them when they need you, that's a problem. And I think, from what I've heard from other communities as well, that seems to be a growing thing. Big problem. According to the Rambam, this person doesn't get olam haba. It's serious. So if this is you, I'm not trying to judge you. If this is you, think about it and think about ways that you can join the community. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be like jumping around hugging everybody. If you're an introvert, that's cool too. I think I am too. But but it's important to be a part of the community find a way to join and participate and help increase the joy and to calm the sorrow. I think I said that okay. The next group, Va'osa averot biyad rama bifarhesia kiyoakim. And the next group of people is people who proudly commit sins, or they do sins on purpose with an upraised arm. They're happy to do them, just like Joachim. And in case you don't remember who Joachim is, there's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim Bet, chapter 36, pasuk verse 8, says that Joachim was so disgusting in the things that he did. The Gemara in Sanhedrin explains that what he did was he said all my predecessors, and he had pretty bad predecessors. He had, Ammon, Achaz, Menashe. He says they didn't know how to make Hashem angry. I'll show you how to do it. That's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. That's Joachim. He was so happy about sinning that that's the kind of thing he did. We've got a few more minutes. I wanted to finish this finish this as much as we can. V'hamosrim. A moser is somebody who gives up Jewish people to Gentile authorities. Not as big of a deal nowadays as it used to be, as I've said in previous classes. But in Jewish history, there are times when you give a Jew over to a Gentile authority. That's basically a death sentence. Right? There's no matter what the person did. Right? You say the person stole a loaf of bread. Oh yeah, off with his head. There wasn't much thought or gentleness in the Gentile court system for a Jew. So that was the big problem with Mosrim back then. Nowadays, it's still kind of a problem. There are obviously times when you must and you should give Jewish people up to the authorities, but there are times when the Gentile law doesn't fit with Jewish law so much. Cheating on taxes, bad, definitely an avera. Definitely the person should do teshuva. To sit in jail for that, not sure. It's you'd have to ask a posek before doing that. But that's the kind of thing that poskim are for. Umatile ema al hatzibur shelo l'shem shemayim, to cause fear, ema, frustration, anxiety for people, for an entire community, for no reason, not l'shem shemayim, just so they can make people upset and nervous. Just so. Usually it's a power trip when that happens, right? Bob Dylan has a song about that. I'm not going to get into it now, but there's an idea that the people who are in charge will try to work up the crowd, make people upset, make people anxious for their own power, because then they'll get elected, right? You should be worried about the quality of the water here, like, yeah, what's going on? And really you're just telling them that because you're somehow in charge of you have your own water company or something like that, right? Shovchei damim, obviously murderers. It's very hard for them to do teshuva, as I said before, especially mass murderers or something like that. People who don't care about human life, even if later on they want to do teshuva, they start caring about human life. All right, gesundheit, hate, wonderful, Baruch Hashem, you care about human life, but alas, there's a person who's gone now who can't do any more mitzvot, right? Bali Lashon Hara, people who speak Lashon Hara, also very hard to do teshuva for that. The people who speak Lashon Hara on a regular basis do not get olam haba, because it's hard to take things back. You said something about somebody, that gets spread to somebody else. There's 30 communities outside of the person's reach who all have a bad impression of this person, and the person didn't even do anything wrong, perhaps. Lashon Hara is Lashon Hara, even if it's true, right? And the last case of somebody who doesn't get olam haba is hamoshech arlatos. That's somebody who undoes, this is a man, obviously, who undoes his circumcision. So to not look circumcised. He wants to fit in with certain kinds of society. And obviously there's all kinds of bad about that. amongst other things, person is rejecting the covenant with Abraham, which is one of the main pillars of Judaism. All right, with that, we finished an hour and then some of Mishnah Torah. Join us again next week, this time for Mishnah Torah 3.7 and 3.8, where we'll talk about minim and apikurim in greater detail. I want to wish everybody a good night. Next class is the Chabruta, Wednesday night at 7:15, and the Parsha class Thursday night. And thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stop the live feed to Facebook.